This film will show general operating procedures for the A3J Vigilante on the ground and in flight. Specific operating procedures will be established by your squadron doctrine. Before each flight, make a visual check of the general external condition of the airplane. If you're flying without a bombardier navigator, check his cockpit for security and proper switch position. Set the IFF master selector to normal and the mode selector switches as desired. In the pilot's cockpit, give the ejection seat a thorough check. See that the parachute deployment lanyard is securely attached to the seat and that the emergency canopy jettison air bottle reads about 3,000 psi. Make sure that the gas line quick disconnects on each side of the seat are secure. As you get squared away in the cockpit, check that the emergency oxygen gauge reads about 1,800 psi. Ensure that the safety pins are removed from the face curtain, the canopy jettison handle, and the two hand grips. Take your time and check carefully each item on your pre-start checklist. If you wish to start the left engine first, place the number 1 engine master switch on and set the number 1 engine starter switch momentarily to start. If there is no RPM indication within 10 seconds, put the starter switch to stop and investigate. If the start is normal, the RPM will begin to rise slowly. As the engine reaches about 10%, place the throttle in idle. If the engine fails to light off, or if the exhaust gas temperature exceeds starting limits, abort the start by placing the throttle to off and the starter switch to stop. During a normal start, the ignition and starting air will shut off automatically at about 45%. However, as a precaution, place the engine starter switch momentarily to stop. The engine will stabilize at about 67% RPM. Check instruments for normal readings. Repeat the starting procedure for the other engine. With both engines at idle, give the signal to disconnect external power. Perform the after-start cockpit check. Extend the speed brakes. With the pitch trim at 0 degrees, drop the flaps to 50 degrees. This will automatically close the speed brakes to 8 degrees, activate the boundary layer control system, and reset pitch trim 8 degrees nose down. Check the hydromechanical, electrical, and pitch org systems. Cycle the stick and rudder to assure proper control surface movement. Depress the electrical flight control system disable button and check for shift to the hydromechanical system. Reset the electrical and pitch org systems. Return the flaps to cruise position and check that the speed brakes are fully closed. Before leaving the line, check your alternate trim and normal trim systems. Check the trim indicators for correct movement. As you taxi out, use nose wheel steering and brakes as required. When the takeoff checklist has been completed and you are in takeoff position, advance the throttles to military and check instruments for normal readings. Release the brakes and use nose wheel steering as required for directional control until the vertical stabilizer becomes effective at approximately 60 knots. Lift the nose wheel at about 135 knots. The airplane will fly off at about 145 knots. When safely airborne and below 230 knots, retract the landing gear and raise the flaps to cruise position. Control feel in the Vigilante is sensitive under most flight conditions. In case the pitch AUG system monitors off, any trim change which occurs can be easily controlled. At operating altitude, practice a stall or two to get the feel of the airplane. In the clean configuration, the stall is preceded by slight buffeting, a high rate of sink, and loss of lateral control. For recovery, ease forward on the stick and add power. In the landing configuration, the stall is also characterized by a high rate of sink and decreasing lateral control. Again, ease forward on the stick and apply power. When practicing stalls with the gear and flaps down, remember not to exceed the maximum allowable airspeed of 230 knots. Intentional spins in the Vigilante are prohibited. But should lack of control indicate an incipient spin, move the stick forward for recovery and regain flying speed before returning to level flight. Should you find yourself in a fully developed spin, retard the throttle to idle and clean up the airplane. Place the control stick full aft and with the spin, full rudder against the spin. Recovery should occur in about 3 to 4 turns. As recovery occurs, neutralize the controls. If you have not fully recovered by squadron altitude minimums, eject. As you start your descent for the approach and landing, be sure to place the canopy defrost switch on and check bomb bay cans empty. Enter the pattern according to local field rules. Below 230 knots, lower the gear and flaps. Check the speed brakes at 8 degrees and complete the landing checkoff list. For a normal landing approach, you should have 1,000 feet and about 140 knots at the 180. Adjust your power between 82 and 88% in order to arrive at the 90 with 500 feet. As you turn into the final, your speed should be about 130 knots. Maintain power above 80% as the boundary layer control decays abruptly below this RPM. Fly the airplane down to touchdown. After touchdown, bring the throttles back to idle. Hold the nose wheel off for aerodynamic braking. After completing the after-landing checklist, shut down both engines. Before leaving the cockpit, ensure that the ground safety pins are replaced. This film has presented the most important operational details on the A3J Vigilante. Study of the flight manual and your own flight experience will improve your ability to fly this aircraft with safety and confidence.